Hello, everybody, and welcome. It is Monday. I hope everybody had a good weekend. Welcome to this week's first episode of Spilling the Anxiety. It's really not the first episode, but you know what I mean, the first episode of the week. So, like I said last week, we had a couple of episodes. I kind of mentioned what this week is going to be about a little bit, and I want to kick off this week actually talking about a very interesting topic because the person who suggested it, she gave a really good reference. So we're back with another suggestion from Kiwi Keelys on Twitter, KIWIKEELYS. So she asked if I had spoken about stereotypes at all on my show. My, is that a tall order? But I actually thought that it would be cool to discuss because when I asked her what exactly did she mean, she gave me a Mean Girls reference. Now, I just have to say, there are a couple of movies that are just like my all-time favorite that I could watch over and over and never be tired of. And I think that this is one of those movies right up there with like The Hot Chick. The Hot Chick is one of my favorite movies. I could probably watch The Vow over and over. I have the vows that they exchange to each other. Like I promise to say the words when needed and share the silence when they're not. I have that tattooed on my ribs. That being said, Mean Girls is one of my favorite references of all time. On October 3rd, every year, it never fails. Someone who knows the movie, which is pretty much everybody, will put out a GIF, talking about, it's October 3rd, because she narrates and she tells the guy, she's like, on October 3rd, he asked me what day it was. And they flash to like the moment and it's like, what day is it today? She's like, it's October 3rd. So if there are any other Mean Girls fans out there, please sit in because we are going to discuss stereotypes today. So let's take a minute to let that sink in. And actually, we're going to take a break so I could appropriately find the charger and plug it into my laptop so this doesn't die halfway through. And we will be back from the break. Stay tuned. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, and we are back. So I didn't notice this until after I went on break, but all the movies that I listed that I would never get tired of, Rachel McAdams is in all of them. So Rachel McAdams, if you ever listen to my podcast in any capacity, just know that you have been a huge influencer over several years in my life. I think that you are a fantastic actress. And anybody who hears this, please feel free to share it and tag Rachel McAdams because if she contacts me and says that she likes my podcast, I will die for that day. So thank you in advance. Anyway, so Mean Girls. For those of you guys that don't know Mean Girls, which will probably be actually the newer generation or the much older generation, Mean Girls was a movie that came out in 2004. Okay, I was 9 then. Now, at that time, I had watched a bunch of Lindsay Lohan movies. Which again, it's funny now because the only connection between all my favorite movies is Rachel McAdams. But at the time, I'd watched it because it was a Lindsay Lohan movie. I was obsessed with The Parent Trap. What was it? Confessions of a Teenage Drama Queen, I believe it was. Freaky Friday. She was like in everything at this time. So when she came out on Mean Girls, I was to die for. Like that's it. I wanted to watch it. So I watched Mean Girls, and actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I desperately want to watch this with my daughters, but I feel like the theme is still a little bit too grown for a 5-year-old, obviously. But I think that this portrays so many stereotypes within it. I don't even know where to begin. So Katie, she is a girl who has been homeschooled her entire life, and now she's being thrown into the high school system because her parents came to the United States from South Africa to get a new job. She's thrust into the high school system and she doesn't understand any of it. And through sitting down with, like the queen bees, the popular girls of the school, she gets roped into their like bullshit games about how they how they dominate high school. And then it turns into this vicious girl on girl attack throughout most of the movie, competing and vying for an attention, a place in the hierarchy, and boys that just, it really doesn't matter. Which actually reminds me of another movie that I don't get sick of, John Tucker Must Die. And Rachel McAdams is not in it. But I think that I am going to try to keep this episode as condensed as possible. But let's be real. Stereotypes fit into all sorts. It can be class. It can be race. It can be gender. It can be ethnicity. Because for those of you that didn't know, ethnicity and race are different things. So I think that I'm trying to figure out where I want to start tackling this from. So let me speak about my experience. I am Hispanic. That comes with a lot of stereotypes. I speak fluent Spanish. I read fluent Spanish. A lot of people hear me and they don't know this. For those of you that haven't seen my face, I have long dark hair. I wear glasses. I have green eyes. I have fair skin. I can definitely pass for not Spanish, but I speak Spanish pretty fluently, which throws everybody off when I open my mouth, because when I do speak in Spanish, people look at me like I should be cleaning their toilets. Insert stereotype number 1, that all Spanish people have a heavy accent, like Salma Hayek or Sofia Vergara, and that is not the case. I speak both fluent English and Spanish, and I don't misstep on either. So that stereotype pisses me off, because I feel like, now don't get me wrong, while a stereotype is labeled that way and everybody's like, hey, let's defeat the stereotypes, there are certain things that I fall into, certain stereotypes that I fall into that are in fact true. Or not true, but for example, rice, beans, and chicken, most definitely a staple in Spanish households. Not to mention, the stereotype that Mexicans and Spanish people, they're like synonymous. It's not. You ask anybody who is Spanish, you ask anybody who is Puerto Rican, Dominican, or any other, I don't want to say any other. Actually, Puerto Rican and Dominican is pretty much the ones that I associate with most. If you ask them how they feel about being called Mexican, absolutely everybody will bite your head off. There is nothing more irritating to me than being called Mexican. I feel like Mexican is a different kind of Spanish, but it's not because it's, the funny thing is, Diana, the person I talk about all the time, she's Mexican. She's probably going to laugh hearing this. It's not because, being Mexican is like so, oh God, but it's this long-standing joke because I think it's a regional thing. Most Dominicans and Puerto Ricans tend to have similar manners of operating. And they're not even in the same, they're obviously on different islands, but I feel like they're closer to one another. And maybe it's because just as time has gone on, they've intermingled a lot more with each other. Now, Mexicans have a country entirely of their own. Okay, they have, it's for the same reason why if you're an avid novela watcher, okay, you'll realize that in the novela world, I have yet to see a popular Dominican or Puerto Rican soap opera, a telenovela, whatever you want to call it. I have yet to see one. Meanwhile, there are ones that take place in Mexico because of, the whole drug game, another stereotype. I mean, the drug game is prominent there, but, as it is just everywhere else. That is, I've never seen one. And as a matter of fact, I think the closest that I've seen to, actually, they're Venezuelan. That's another one, like Venezuelan, Cuban, Colombian. They're all kind of regional to themselves too. And they have a very similar dialect. So they also kind of get grouped together. Central America gets grouped together. It's a whole thing. So I think that the difference between my culture of Hispanic, which is Puerto Rican and Dominican, versus Mexican, why I get so upset is because regionally it's not even the same thing. They have a dialect, the way that they speak, their tone in Spanish is so much different than mine. So when I just get lumped in with it because it just so happens to be a dialect of Spanish, it gets me upset. I'm proud of where I come from. I'm proud of, the content that we produce. I'm proud of the food that we have. Diana tells me like she's like her favorite thing is tinga. I have no idea what tinga is. She's explained it to me. I still don't know what the hell it is. There are certain things that we share alike for the same, like arroz con leche, which is literally milk and rice and milk. Forget everything in Spanish is backwards. So there are, that stereotype, it pisses me the hell off. So in Mean Girls, when Katie comes in and they ask her where she's from, she's like, oh, I'm from South Africa, where I come from Africa. And they look at her like, please don't tell me this pasty redhead is from Africa. That doesn't even make sense. But that's because they're already putting her into a stereotype. You see, I think that, so Regina, which is I believe Rachel McAdams' character, that's her name. She is your typical, when I say typical, I'm giving into stereotypes, typical rich white girl. So is Gretchen Wieners. They're all, as a matter of fact, I don't even think Gretchen Wieners is white. I'm not even sure. I don't think they discuss it. Lacey Chabert doesn't look entirely white to me. That's actually a good thing to look up. What is Lacey Chabert? Lacey Chabert is ethnicity. Yep, I'm looking this up while I'm doing this, you guys. Okay, she's Cajun. She was born in Purvis. Her father is Cajun and hails from Louisiana. So she might be white. Okay. Well, I don't know. She can pass for, she could pass for something else in my opinion. She doesn't look the same degree of white as Rachel McAdams and Amanda Seyfried in the movie. So they, it's this group of white girls that, Katie is from Africa, and everybody's just like, oh, that doesn't really match. That just doesn't click. It doesn't make sense. I think a lot of people, I've seen videos on it. I saw a video on it the other day that, when most people say Asian, instantly what comes to your mind is Chinese, Korean, not even really Filipino, but you think of Chinese, Japanese, Korean in that section. But Indians are Asians. Indians are Asians as well. It's just the other side of Asia. The only thing that caused them to be different is literally like geography. But they are on the same continent. And I think that it throws a lot of people off when they see somebody from somewhere and they associate a specific image with that, and they don't, and it doesn't match up to what it is. Now, I say all of this to say, my favorite saying is, I don't appreciate certain stereotypes that come with who I am. I have to face stereotypes all the time. I think I spoke about this on a previous podcast. One of the stereotypes is that because I have 3 children and they are all from the same person, that I have been married or I am currently married. When I'm not married, or when I tell people that I'm not married, it kind of throws them for a loop. And then the fact that I am a Latina single mother, it sucks to say, but I feel like people look at it as appropriate. Let's delve deeper into those stereotypes that my children are black. Their father is black. I look like the nanny. My children are all shades darker than me. They do not look like my children. When I step out with them and their aunts from their father's side, or I step out with my cousin who is darker skinned than me, everybody assumes that those kids belong to everybody but me. It irritates the absolute hell out of me. My daughters used to go to a school that was very, their stance was very pro-black. They were educated constantly. About 97% of the population were black children. It was something that I really loved for them, because I want them to know all sides of themselves. I want them to embrace all sides of themselves. But when I would step in, I was the only fair-skinned parent. I don't want to say white parent because I'm not white. But when I check off that little box, when I'm doing, if I'm filling out applications or I'm filling out surveys or anything that includes demographics, and they ask me to select my race, I have to be realistic. I'm fair-skinned. I put down white. But my race isn't white. My father's father was some Django-looking Frederick Douglass, looking Dred Scott-looking dude. It just so happened that him and his siblings came out fair-skinned. I think like 2 of them are a little bit darker, but they all came out fair-skinned like their mother. In turn, I came out fair-skinned because my mother is relatively light, and my father is just, he's white. I'm talking about rosy cheeks white. So that's not something that's visible to everybody, and I have to be realistic. But I remember getting into a conversation once around time that the riots were happening and George Floyd and all this other stuff. And I was upset. And it almost seemed like everybody looked at me like, bitch, why are you upset? This is not your plight. This is not your struggle. Mind you, I associate almost entirely with Hispanic. I think that's right. I don't think it is my struggle. I'm not going to stand here or stand on a soapbox and use what I know about myself to say, hey, I identify as a black woman, because the reality is that I don't. It's something that's in my genetics. It's something that I am, but I grew up with Hispanic culture. I grew up speaking Spanish. Both of my parents, my dad lost his dad young, so he was raised by a Puerto Rican woman. He identifies as Spanish. I don't know how else I'm supposed to identify. I don't want to take on a plight that really isn't mine to take on, if that makes sense. We're going to take a quick break here, and then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more about how I got accused of using my white privilege. We'll be back. Thank you. All right, and we are back. So my white privilege. Just hearing that right now come out of my mouth makes me laugh as hard as I wanted to the first time I heard it. I'll never forget this. So it was from somebody that she is 100% Spanish. When I say 100% Spanish, I mean both of her parents are full 100% purebred Dominican. Her mother is dark skin, and her father's light skin. She has maybe, her skin color really shouldn't matter, but I would say she is a kind of like a caramel color, I would say. Or maybe when you put like not enough milk in your coffee. It's like it's a darkish brown, but it's not necessarily black. So she's talking to me about her and her siblings, and my stance on what was going on with George Floyd and with everything. That upset me majorly, but I was upset because there were a lot of, I believe I was on my way home from Maryland, and I was on my way to New York, and I hadn't even, at the time, I didn't even know that I was pregnant, and I was. And I was pregnant with my son, which was a whole nother thing, because I know that in today's day and age, I'll be raising a young black man and 2 young black women. Now, My son came out drastically lighter skinned than his sisters, even though they all have the same father. He's like slightly darker than me, but still much lighter than his sisters. I plan on raising my son as a young Black and Spanish man, but if I'm looking to be honest, depending on what situation he's in, most times he will identify as a young Black man. And I always think that everybody should identify with with the hardest part of them. Not the hardest part, but kind of like Bo on Blackish. She's white and Black, but she identifies as a Black woman because when she was growing up, the community didn't accept her as you're white. That was like, well, you've got an ounce of Black in you. You've got Black in you. You're Black. That's it. This is what you are. You are not half. You are not mixed. You are a Black woman. I think that my children will be seen for the Black side of themselves more than they will for the Spanish side of themselves. And that's not in a negative light. That's just the way that I think that it's going to be. So we were talking about the rioting that's going on, and I was upset because I was like, yo, I want to feel safe where I live, and all this rioting and everything that's going on. I understand that the riots is not the problem. It's the looting that's happening. People that are taking advantage of a situation that hits home for a lot of people to steal TVs and steal jewelry and steal shit from, technology stores. What cause is that helping? And so she was like, well, you got to understand that up until now, saying something and all of this hasn't worked, so violence is the only answer. And I'm like, no, that's drastically incorrect. I think that if talking hasn't worked up until this point, then it's because the right words were not said. And I don't believe that people from our community, meaning the Black community, the Spanish community, going forth and looting, or people taking advantage of the situation to loot, it's not helping the cause. Because you stole a TV, that's not going to shine the light on what happened with George Floyd and why it was wrong. That's just how I feel about it. And I don't like that people from my community, from this community, are putting other people from their community in danger and making the streets not safe. So now I have to race against the clock to make a curfew that's in place where I'm living because other people. So I'm mourning the traumatic death at the hands of cops from somebody from my community. Other people like me, other people like him, stand up and they're upset about it. But then those same people, or even people that aren't even part of that community but taking advantage of what's going on, are making my community unsafe. So the same people that I'm mourning, or the same type of person that I'm mourning, is the same type of people that's putting me in danger. And I don't like that. If I'm mourning the loss of a Hispanic man, and I decide, well, I'm going to go ahead upset and I'm going to burn down my village of Hispanic people, I'm not doing anything better for the community. That's the way that I see it. And I don't want anybody to look too much into it when I say these people and people from my community. I'm trying to establish a reference. I am by no means racist or prejudiced in the slightest. So that's what upset me. And so we were getting into this conversation where she was like, yeah, go violence. And I'm like, no, that's really not it. I don't appreciate further unsafe actions in my community. Like, we need to stop and we really need to sit down and figure out how we're going to deal with this that's not violent. Basically, Malcolm X versus I'm okay. And it somehow got into this conversation about how the reason why I feel that way is because of my white privilege. Let's take a silence for that, because that was the most bonkers shit that I ever heard. I didn't even know how to address it, honest to God. My white privilege? And I'm like, please explain that further. and she said she's Afro-Latina. She's got darker skin than I do, and people judge her for that, for being darker skinned. And her brothers who are also dark skinned men, and they judge them when they walk down the street with their hands in their pockets. And it was all a very moving and convincing argument, if it wasn't for the fact that they were not black in the slightest. I was like, I don't even understand. I understand the whole Afro-Latina thing. I understand that, yes, there is a difference in your skin color and mine. I'm not stupid enough to decide that's not a factor. What bothers me about this is that it seems that you're trying to take on a plight that has nothing to do with you. I wouldn't want to take on the plight of being a black woman, because even though technically I am, it is not, again, I identify as Hispanic. I can't sit there and say that I have experienced the same trauma as a black woman when it's obvious that I don't really pass for one. I've always passed for being Hispanic. I can't say that I've experienced something that if other people don't see me as, they wouldn't treat me as such. Now, being a minority woman, it isn't much different, but there are different standards, I believe. And I wasn't okay with taking on that label, because I don't want to sit there and let everybody think that I'm going through something that I'm really not. I experienced my own shit as a Hispanic woman. I'm not going to try to take on a fight that's not mine. Now, as far as my white privilege, I was like, I don't think you really understand what white privilege is. I'm not sitting here with, if I go to, my name isn't even neutral. My last name is something that absolutely nobody can pronounce. If I go ahead and I'm not conscious of my accent, people will think that my name is Maria and I'm cleaning toilets. Okay? This isn't, when people know, I feel like the only people who don't know that I'm Spanish are the people that don't look at me hard enough. Yes, I have fair skin. Yes, I have colored eyes. Yes, I have long hair. But I am in no way, with my proportions, do I look white at all. And that's not to say that white people are, flat-chested, flat-assed. But even in just the way that my body is, the way that I carry myself, my features, even the level of whiteness that I am, the tone of my skin is a tanned white. It's not pale or pasty or porcelain or look easily burned in any fashion. Almost every single Caucasian person that I've met has very refined features or very sharp edges on the nose, or, they have distinctive features. We can say this about just about anybody. Black women that I've met all have, for the most part, very fantastic bone structure underneath. For my darker skinned black women, it's almost always, you can tell by the nose. Those that have deep African roots, you can usually tell by the nose. In my opinion. That doesn't encompass everybody. That means usually. Being Spanish, I can usually tell when somebody's Spanish from quite far away. And it's because there's certain features you just can't move past. And that's not a stereotype. That isn't prejudiced. That isn't anything like that, because I could be wrong. But we are a people that all come from the same. So when people get offended, it's like, oh, so all black people look the same, all Spanish people look the same, all this. No, not all Spanish people look the same, and not all black people look the same. But do they all have general features that even anthropologically in your bones you can tell because they all come from a similar place? Hell yeah. So I don't believe that I have white privilege. I feel like, and even then, I feel like white privilege is different for men and women. But by no way, shape, or form have I ever been treated in my life like I have white privilege. because I don't. I don't have it. And for her to assume that just because my skin is lighter than hers, also simultaneously labeling herself, the opposite of white privilege would be, in my opinion, black misfortune, minority misfortune. Because white privilege is the ability to identify with Caucasian and use that to your advantage to avoid specific situations that another race or another ethnicity would not have the fortune of being able to avoid. By no circumstance does that apply to me. I have never in my life been handed something or has something been made easy for me just because of the way that I look or the way that I carry myself. And I went to a high school in Manhattan, which was crazy for a kid from the Bronx like me. Now, I also recognize that I have always been different. When I heard her say that I had white privilege, and so I didn't understand the plight of the people who were upset about what was going on with George Floyd, and the only reason that I thought that we could talk it out and that we can find a less violent way that didn't affect the community to deal with this was because I had white privilege. That shit was enough to make me want to stab her in the eye. Love her to death. But God, was that one of the stupidest shit that I've ever heard. But again, I think the naivete came from being young at the time. This was 2 years ago. She's still relatively young, probably still thinking a very similar train of thought, but that's where we stand. So that's where I fit on those stereotypes. Now, I'm trying to tackle so many, and I feel like this is an appropriate time for us to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to discuss some other stereotypes. And for me personally, people that I associate with and how I don't like when the people in my life fall into stereotypes because of how it reflects upon me. Stay tuned. We'll be back shortly. Okay, we are back from the break, and I'm going to go ahead and give my final thoughts before wrapping up this final segment of the show. So, we spoke about my white privilege. I can never say that with a fucking straight face. We spoke about my white privilege and how I feel like some of these stereotypes kind of contribute to how we see day to day. Now, one of the final things that I wanted to go into about stereotypes, because it is not possible for us to delve into everything about stereotypes. I might make like a second episode. I mentioned on another podcast that I was seeing somebody, there was like this TikTok about somebody who was talking about like Gen Zers and how they might have terrible relationships with their parents because millennials and baby boomers kind of have gotten into this place where, they were like forced to have children and they beat their children and everything was like respect, don't talk back. And Gen Zers are like standing up for themselves. And I was just like, wow, it was a young black woman who was doing this. And I was like, there is so much that I feel like is forgotten there. This isn't just because people like beating their kids and they're passing on that generational trauma. That's not what this is. I feel like there are specific aspects that are missing from her analysis, let's call it. First off, I know for me, my parents came into this country with very poor education, very limited education. My mother did not get past middle school. My father dropped out in the 11th grade. Okay. from between my parents. My brother went off to college. My oldest brother went off to college. But for me, in my household, growing up with my brother did not finish. I don't believe that he finished through the ninth grade either. And I went to college. That was huge for me. My parents came to this country to do something better for themselves and for their children. So I know that I would feel some type of way if I uprooted my life and came somewhere foreign. And, there are so many statistics about like Hispanic and Black women becoming teen parents. And it was unspoken, but we were supposed to beat that stereotype. We were not going to become, and I know everybody's heard the stereotype about like, especially, Mexican women, that they have a lot of kids and they come to this country to have their anchor babies and all that other shit. And then there's like with the stereotype where there's like young Black mothers who don't have an opportunity to get out of the ghetto, and there are Black men out there who just have baby mama upon baby mama upon baby mama, and they're not taking care of any of their kids, leaving behind like a string of fatherless children. I absolutely hate when people associate those stereotypes with me. And when I see people that are like me that fall into those stereotypes, and I know that they're capable of so much more, boy, does that fucking upset me. It does. It does. I can't say that I'm not a stereotype or a statistic. I did have kids young. Also went to college. I know not college isn't for everybody, and not going to college doesn't make you a bad person. But, I do know that, growing up, there was always the knowledge that Dominican Republic was like the plastic surgery, capital, or whatever you want to call it. And when I see women like me when I see Spanish women with fake tits and fake ass and fake this and fake that, or that have gotten plastic surgery, internally, it upsets me. That does not mean that I have a problem with you as a person. That does not mean that I don't like you. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to be your friend. It doesn't mean any of that. But there is a stereotype of women out there, particularly Spanish women, that they get tits put in and ass put up. They get their lips done, or they get, the tummy tucks. Oh, the tummy tucks that come from DR. That's such like a prominent fucking thing. And it somehow is associated with that if you get plastic surgery, you're a bimbo. And that's not true. I think that people who get plastic surgery, there is a certain level of discomfort with yourself, a certain problem with self-confidence, and you should be allowed to do whatever it is that fixes your self-confidence. But again, somehow it's synonymous with just being stupid. Like you're incapable of doing anything else but being a fucking trophy. And when women that share my ethnicity and also have my friendship give into this, and people look at me and people look at them, it undermines what I worked for. And is that society's problem because they've attached this stereotype to this? Because I have friends who have gotten plastic surgery done and it was for their own self-confidence or for whatever it is. And they're, honest to God, some of the sweetest people that I've ever met. Like some ride or dies that I know that if I called right now, I'd be like, yo, bitch, I need you. She would be here. Hell yes. But I don't like the image that it gives. Also, there's like something called like chapeadoras, which is a woman who is basically with a man for the money, trying to bleed him dry of all of his funds. This is also like, I feel like it's actually pretty synonymous with being a woman as opposed to just a Spanish woman, but there's a specific name for it in Spanish women, and that's what gets me upset. There are so many things that I feel like when I bought a house, people automatically, whenever I called anybody to deal with the things that needed to be done in my house, they almost always deferred to my husband, I'm doing air quotes for anybody who can't see me. I was like, no, this is my house. And their jaw would just drop, because apparently a 23-year-old Spanish woman that owns a house is unheard of. I must be coming from some good money, or I must have married high up there. I must be the lady of the house in the sense that I don't own it. When I bought my house and I needed to close in a decent time frame, they told me, the bank manager came out and he was like, I just had to meet you. And I said, well, hi, here I am. I'm glad you did this in such a short time frame, because it's really what I needed. And he was like, I actually had to see you because I wanted to come see you for myself, that this was true. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He was like, I looked for you on social media everywhere and I couldn't find a thing about you. And I was like, good. That's how I wanted it. People underestimate what they use social media for, what anybody uses social media for. When you apply for a house, you apply for a job, you apply for being a fucking volunteer, okay? They are going to look you up. And what you put out there is going to make a difference. And they're going to go back as far as they can go. It's kind of like when you apply for financial aid for school and they want your taxes from 2 fucking years ago. You're not making that money anymore. You're not working at that job anymore. But are they going to use that income? Hell yes. It doesn't matter that you're unemployed anymore. It doesn't matter that you've quit your job to now pursue school. You will be responsible for it as the person you were 2 years ago. And that's kind of how it is with stereotypes. It doesn't matter who you are today. It doesn't matter what you're doing today. You will always be held accountable for whatever kind of person they think you to be. Or worse, whatever person they knew you were a couple of years ago, even if you're not that person anymore. Stereotypes are a tricky thing. Okay, another stereotype that I fight all the time is being a veteran. Okay, I'm not going to tell you how many Criminal Minds episodes, Law and Order SVU episodes, and every other fucking episode that wants to deal with, the token veteran episode, or, everybody comes home from the service after seeing bodies blown up, and now they just want to kill their family, and then they've been, they separated themselves, and if they're a woman, they became promiscuous to deal with the trauma, and if they're a man, they've been hurting their wife and strangling them in bed, and all this. Oh my God, that's so exhausting. Spoiler alert, yeah, I went through shit in the military that really changed me, but most of my mental health issues have to deal with normal everyday shit that civilians go through that I dealt with before and after leaving the service. It is exhausting for people to think that veterans cannot function outside of whatever that they were trained to do. I'm not going to say it's not hard. I'm not going to say that there aren't people that don't fit the criteria, but every veteran that leaves the service, absolutely not. There are several people who are famous and are veterans and did have, time in service. But I'm actually going to talk about that the next episode, because I want to delve into, it's kind of like a stereotypes episode part 2, but my struggle as a veteran part 1. They kind of just mesh together. With that being said, I want to thank everybody for listening to me today. And I want to encourage you guys to follow me on all of my social media. It's all the same handle, powher_poetry, POWHER_poetry. For more updates. And I promise, I'm trying to get more diligent about blog posts. Some people do this part-time. I have opted against employment to do this full time. So it's hard. It's a lot. I'm putting my all into it. So thank you everybody for listening, and we will see you on Wednesday.